So welcome everybody to this Latin America Bureau webinar on mining and environmental justice. So my name's Tom Gatehouse. I'm a writer and editor at Latin America Bureau, and I'm the author of the book, The Heart of Our Earth, Community Resistance to Mining in Latin America. So we've got three fantastic panelists for you this evening, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end, so we'll do our best to ask some of these questions. So just a brief introduction to our speakers this evening. First of all, we've got Viviana Moreno. She's an Argentine biochemist from the city of Rosario, who had a career in Argentina's public health system, now retired. She's lived in Esquel, in the province of Chubut, in Patagonia, for 37 years. And for more than 20 of those years, she's been involved with the Asamblea No a la Mina Esquel, or the No to the Mine Assembly, which is one of Argentina's most well-known and celebrated anti-mining movements. Following Viviana, we've got David Fajardo Torres, who is an Ecuadorian environmental lawyer, a political scientist, and a defender of the rights of nature from the city of Cuenca. He is a member of the group Yas Unidos, which fights against oil extraction in the Yasuni National Park in the east of Ecuador, in the Amazon, and also the group Cabildo Popular por el Agua de Cuenca, which has successfully mobilized and defended the water of Cuenca against encroachment by transnational mining companies. Finally, this evening, we have Bruno Milanese, who is an industrial engineer and associate professor at the University of Juiz de Fora in Brazil. He teaches at the engineering school and the geography graduate program. He also coordinates the Politics, Economy, Mining, Environment and Society Research Group, or POEMAS, which involves researchers from 6 Brazilian universities. He's one of Brazil's foremost voices on the mining industry, on environmental conflicts, and the impacts of mineral extraction for the energy transition. So our agenda for this evening, we're first going to hear from Viviana, followed by David. After that, we're going to take a short break of around 10 minutes. When we come back, we'll hear from Bruno. And then for the last 20 minutes, half an hour or so, we will have a Q&A session. But first of all, I'd like to tell you a bit more about my book, The Heart of Our Earth. So it looks at the expansion of the mining industry in Latin America since the early 1990s, the social and environmental impacts this has had, and how communities have organized and fought back. So very briefly, for some of you may not know too much about mining, what are these impacts? So I'd say in very simple terms, mining has 3 main impacts. First of all, on water. So mining consumes vast amounts of water. Large mines can consume as much as tens of millions of liters of water in a single day. Mines may also contaminate local water sources due to spillages, leaks, and problems like acid mine drainage. Obviously, as well, with such high consumption of water resources, this leaves less for local communities for their economic activities, such as agriculture, and even in some cases for domestic consumption. The second really important issue that we need to bear in mind when thinking about mining is waste. So mines are essentially massive waste factories. So some gold mines, for example, they extract a ton of rock to process and to extract less than a single gram of gold. So for this to be profitable, vast amounts of rock have to be removed and processed, and this produces waste. This waste then has to be securely stored, usually behind a structure like a tailings dam. And failures or problems with these kinds of structures can lead to contamination of the local environment, for example, via seepages and leaks, and also sometimes through disasters, so catastrophic failures of tailings dams, as we've seen in recent years, most notably in Brazil, so near the town of Mariana in 2015, and then in 2019, less than 4 years later, in Brumadinho. Finally, the last kind of issue that's really important to bear in mind when we think about mining is human rights, because with such potentially catastrophic impacts on water supply and on the local environment, it's unsurprising that communities tend to resist. However, this resistance sometimes puts them at risk of confrontations with armed actors such as the army and the police, private security firms hired by mining companies, in certain contexts, paramilitary groups, and even as well, organized criminal mafias. So the Heart of Our Earth, it's the product of several years' work involving various different researchers, not just me, and it includes interviews that were gathered in the field as well as online during the COVID-19 pandemic. It amplifies the voice of people affected in mining affected communities to an audience in the global north, where of course so many of those who benefit from mineral extraction, so not just mining companies and their shareholders, but also law firms, consultants, geologists, and others are located. And the aim was to encourage reflection on the relationship between mining-related harms on the one hand, and also our lifestyle on the other, and our resource-intensive consumer culture. This is because I think mining, for some people, they may think of it as kind of a niche issue, but I think it's only niche in the sense that it's, if you like, hiding in plain sight. We take these things for granted, and we tend not to think about the materials that power our lives and where they actually come from and what the costs of extracting them might be. Yet the harms that we documented in the Heart of Our Earth may become even more widespread in the coming years, and potentially quite quickly, due to the demands of the energy transition. So we're all now more or less agreed on the need to rapidly decarbonize our economies in order to combat climate change. But this is going to depend on technologies such as solar panels, wind turbines, massive battery storage, and electric vehicles, all of which are massively metal and mineral intensive. And there are some really quite alarming projections for increases in production in the coming years of several 100% for certain metals and minerals. The World Bank produced a report in 2020 where they estimated that for certain key metals and minerals, the increase would be as much as 500%. So obviously, this means a lot more mining. So in the Heart of Our Earth, it looked at just a handful of mining conflicts in Latin America, but there are perhaps as many as 300 spread throughout the region today. So the book really asks, before we go any further down this route of yet more extraction, it asks, is extraction on this scale really necessary? And are there any alternatives? So I'm shortly going to hand over to Viviana, but just before I do, I would like to tell you where you can buy the book. So here in the chat, you have a link to the Practical Action Publishing, where you can buy the book. And also, we're going to give you a discount exclusively for the guests of this webinar. Which you can redeem until the end of October if you wish to. So in the book, I really tried as much as possible to privilege the community perspective on the understanding that it's the people who are affected by the mining industry who are best positioned to tell their stories of how the industry has affected, how the industry has affected them and what they have done about it, how they have got together and fought back. And in that sense, this is really what this webinar is about. I wanted to cut out the middleman and to provide a platform for knowledge exchange with these three fantastic speakers from Latin America who have been thinking about and studying these issues for much longer than I have, and who have had experience of the mining industry, which is in a sense a lot more direct. So I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, Viviana Moreno. Viviana, it's over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Bueno, yo soy miembro de la Asamblea del No a la Mina de Esquel.
Hello everyone,
Y,
I
bueno,
am a
quiero
member of the
compartir un poco
Assembly of the
estos
Self-Convened
20
Neighbors
años
for the
de
No to the Mining Scale,
trayectoria
and I would like to talk about our resistance to
en
large-scale metal
en
mining for the last 20
lista, sí,
years.
que la hemos considerado
We think this is a very important fight,
una resistencia, 20 años de
and
resistencia.
it is a sort of
Bueno,
resistance.
nosotros nos oponemos a la minería metalífera
We oppose the metal transnational mining, especially the large-scale one that we call mega mining or large-scale mining, and that it is a form of extractivism. In other words, it's an appropriation of natural resources that we consider common goods at a large and very intense scale, when at least 50% of these resources are destined for foreign markets. Extractive activities emerge at a time when there are less barriers to gaining community acceptance. And that's why companies try to get a social license to operate. In 2002, when the mining company arrived in Skell, society was more vulnerable due to the social, political, and economic crisis of 2001. There was a high rate of unemployment and high inflation. That's why when these companies and politicians promoted this type of activity, we thought it might be the solution. There was a favorable environment for large-scale mining, and there are different factors that make this environment possible. Some are linked to the economy, politics and technology, like a globalized capitalist and consumerist society, and some others are linked to the local situation. And in Skell, at the time, we had all of these: unemployment, depopulation, impoverishment, despair. A third of the population was unemployed. We had political corruption, political clientelism, and a favorable legal context. From the 90s, we've had a legal framework in Latin America that had tax incentives to attract multinational mining companies. So at the time, we had in Skell what we call the illusion. Gold in Skell, said the headline of a local newspaper, in big letters with a photograph of the Cordón Skell in the Cerro Tres Picos, only 6 kilometers away from the city center. And we knew that there was gold and silver in the region. This is a very nice and beautiful region that had a very small amount of inhabitants. However, the municipal and the provincial governments opened the door to the Canadian mining company, Meridian Gold, and what they promised was that they will create 400 jobs in the mine, 1,200 indirect jobs related to services, and that they would generate greater investment. Also, their main slogan said that mining was an engine for development inside the community. Meridian Gold's establishment in the region was outrageous. They arrived with plenty of 4x4 Toyotas, which caught our attention, and the company started to spread around the region. They hired the best properties in the region at a much higher price. They normally got the most beautiful properties in the region, and they altered the real estate market and multiplied the value of the land by 10. They also started making substantial donations to public institutions such as schools and the only hospital that we have in Skell as part of their CRS work. everything seemed to go smoothly for the company, as it happened before in Chile. So the mining company, Meridian Gold, the one that was going to be responsible for this project, came from Chile, where everything was working smoothly, both the function and the general administration of the mine. But so what we saw was the reality, which was really different. We didn't know what this type of mining was about. And on the 4th of December of 2002, there was a public hearing to approve the environmental impact assessment planned. So a month later, on the 4th of January 2003, they could start building the processing plant in the Cerro. But then we started to hear some of the voices of the community that started to question this activity and the arrival of mining companies in the region. Not only Meridian Gold, but also others. And they were questioned, especially because of the way that they were starting to settle in the region, and especially in indigenous territories. In mid-2002, during a conference organized by the mining company and DuPont, it was revealed that this new type of modern mining was not what we thought, but that in this particular context, to be able to get to this mineral, they were going to use another new substance that was cyanide, and that was going to be sold by DuPont. After this revelation, two chemistry professors at the Universidad Nacional de Patagonia, Marta Saores and Silvia González, who got really shocked about the use of cyanide, decided to research what this new mining mode will entail and decided to share these findings with the city's institutions. All this knowledge led us to get to know what this mining was going to mean. And we found out that it was going to use polluting substances, require large amounts of energy, use a huge amount of water for long periods of time, produce acid mine drainage. It was going to increase traffic levels. It was going to generate mining environmental liabilities, and it was going to occupy a huge territory. And we also knew that in Chubut, we were only gonna have 2% of everything, all the money that we were gonna get from this mine. So then we thought that for us, mining was a synonym for plunder, and that what was important was to protect water. In October 2002, we realized that we had to organize ourselves. We had one meeting at a public school attended by 600 neighbors, and we voted and decided we didn't want mining in scale. We started working non-stop. We used this assembly, which has an horizontal and multidisciplinary organization. It gathered different cosmovisions, which comes from the indigenous communities. And we learned about the cosmovisions of these people. For them, life is only possible if we live in harmony with nature. And we decided to leave our anthropocentrism aside and respect human and non-human lives. It wasn't represented by any political or trade union flags. And we also started working with other activities affected by large-scale mining. And Algala, for example, in Catamarca told us, don't let them in. And in Tabo Grande, in Peru, they recommended us to have not only one leader, but a more horizontal structure. We realized we didn't have a lot of time, before the vote for this environmental impact assessment. So in less than 4 months, we voted, and the big majority decided that they didn't want this mining project in the region. So we started working. We wanted to educate all the neighbors. We went door to door. We disseminated information. We started organizing talks in different institutions, and we organized television and radio programs. There was an environmental impact assessment presented by the mining, and according to the professionals that were part of this assembly, doctors, politicians, economists, geologists, etc., we all analyzed it, and we saw that this environmental impact assessment was uncertain. And we made all this information public in the different media. And the mistakes of this environmental impact assessment were so big that the government decided to cancel this public hearing. So this was our first success, we could say. We had determining factors for our success. First one is that we had a non-cloistered technical knowledge, so science was made accessible, and we used different tools for popular education. And secondly, there was a strong participatory democracy. So we tried to use semi-direct democracy tools as the ones in our provincial constitution, such as the amparo or the consultation process, especially for some topics that are very important for the community. So the citizens of the Esquel's
Reforçamos o
response
tecido
managed
social,
the
também
mobilization
tínhamos
of the
sinergias
community
com outras
and the strengthening of
comunidades,
the social
fizemos uma grande
fabric, the
pesquisa
creation of a synergy with other affected communities, dissemination of
também
research and
conhecimento.
knowledge. Everything seems to be easy,
Esses tempos foram
but
de
this
grande
time was really
violência
violent,
daquelas
especially
empresas que
violence coming from all these agencies and mining companies. We made 40 claims because we were threatened, because of the violence we were suffering, especially those who were more public in the community. In 2003, we managed to put pressure on the Honorable Deliberating Council to declare Esquel a non-toxic and environmentally sustainable municipality and authorize the municipal executive authorities through all this mobilization of all the citizens of Esquel to hold a non-binding referendum on whether the neighbors wanted the mining project Cordón Esquel or not. It took place on the 23rd of March 2003, and more than 81% of the neighbors voted no. The 23rd of March is now known as Dignity Day for the people of Esquel, since even though they were struggling to put on food on the table due to unemployment, they decided to protect the water. One neighbor filed an environmental amparo, which was approved by the judge of first instance, and as a result, the works at El Cerro were halted. And then, due to what was going on in Chubut, the legislature of the province passed law number 5001 that bans open pit mining with the use of cyanide in the province of Chubut. However, to ensure its approval, Section 2 establishes a zoning process to analyze where in the area mining could be possible. And this is just a way of leaving the door open to mining companies to try and operate in the future. What we have always known is that the referendum was only one fight. And that's why we have never left the trench, as we say. So during 20 years, we have been vigilant of what was happening in the province and in the whole region, as well as in the country. Meridian Gold left Skell, and there was a long period of silence, approximately 6-7 years. Once the enemy had gone, some difference started to arise among this very heterogeneous group of members. And this was a tipping point for the assembly. What we know is that the mining has a lot of time and a lot of money, and that's why they can wait for the most favorable moment to come back. The number of members started to decrease, but we kept marching every fourth, and we have been doing it for the last 20 years. We stayed vigilant and we stayed strong in our decision to reject mining. It's important for us to keep vigilant because we know that this predatory enemy comes and goes at different times, but they will always find us on guard. And I would say this is one of the main reasons why our fight is so successful. From 2004, some mining companies started to do some exploration work on the region. It's important to know that Chubut has a territorial distribution similar to Reino Unido, so the size is more or less the same. And we have lots of minerals, but especially silver, copper, gold, rare earths, and a lot of uranium, especially at the center of the region. We can also see here all the territories that joined the fight to be able to stop mining in the province. Well, they were quiet here. They settled down in 2004 in the Meseta with a new project that was called Navidad, and that tries to extract silver, lead, and copper. Didn't want to face the same issues they faced in Skell, so they engaged with the communities from very early on through sociologists and anthropologists. And they started to fulfill the needs of the communities who had been neglected by the state government. So everything that the people in the communities need, they could get from the mining companies. And these built a bit of trust. However, they kept rejecting mine because they said, especially the indigenous communities and the Mapuche Tehuelche community, that this zone, the Meseta, was not a sacrifice zone. These communities have suffered plunder for many years. They have been threatened, they have been killed, and different people have tried to get the most out of their territories and plunder their territories. That's why Chubut is not any province. The territory has been witness of several fights. But where is our fight tonight? Well, to stop large-scale metal mining and export in Chubut, to consolidate a provincial network that includes all provinces in Chubut, also a national UAC, a plurinational movement supporting water for all, and to form a network of people from Latin America affected by Pan-American silver. We keep raising awareness about the impacts of large-scale mining, and through a new bill called the Popular Initiative Bill, we try to achieve a more protective regulation framework against metal mining, including the exploitation of uranium. So the resistance from the mountain to the seashore started in 2012, and then in 2014 we had the first community-driven bill But we didn't get all we wanted from the legislators. As we can see in the picture, the legislator is getting some commands from the people from the mining company. And then in 2020, we presented our second community-driven bill that was rejected. And nowadays, we have the third community-driven bill. The foundations of our fight always was and still is knowledge, because we know the scientific content and the information that we need to fight these kind of projects. And we did this through different dissemination resources: social media, radio, website, our popular initiative, information leaflets, conferences, information talks. We created a handbook that is called Hablemos de Minería, or Let's Talk About Mining, that you can find on our website. We've got videos and books for children. So we tried to raise awareness across Argentina about the impacts of mining. Well, what are our main challenges? Well, especially to resist attacks from the mining sector, because every 3 or 4 years they try to come back and insert mega mining in the region, to prepare the young population to continue the fight, to understand that the fight goes beyond large-scale mining and it has to do with extractivism as a whole. And we know that extractivism is damaging the territory in Latin America, and water and our territory as a whole is at risk. And then we want to consolidate an active network against extractivism that promotes national laws such as the Wetland Acts.
Institutional pollution is one of our major obstacles, this mining lobby within the branches of the government. And what we see as the response from businesses and economic and political powers, behind them are persecution, threats, illegal spying, the prosecution of demonstrations, and extreme violence. There are many examples of violations of human rights and examples of violation of constitutional rights. I think the biggest example of what happened in Esquel was the Tubutazo, which took place in a province where 30,000 inhabitants presented a law against mining, but then the provincial government passed a law to enable mega mining, as you can see there in the map. They enabled mega mining in 2 departments of this province. Of course, this resulted in a popular mobilization. The people started rejecting this. They started on the 15th of December, and it took about a week. The people who used their bodies, so to speak, because they were defenseless, they had no weapons, they defended the water with their own bodies. They did not become afraid. On the contrary, they continued to demonstrate on the streets in all the capitals of the province. There was more police repression by the police forces. Then we went to Rosen, 16 kilometers away. The mobilization continued and the police repression continued as well there. So we had a situation where either the government would fall, or either the law had to be cancelled, which it finally happened on the 21st of December. And now I'm going to share some images of what we call the hunt. And that's how we celebrated our success. Water and life is not for the mind. The consequence of this chubutazo was that the neighbors were trialed and those responsible for the police brutality were rewarded. The neighbors of the province have been criminalized and they're being taken to court. We, as members of the Assembly, admit that it's not an easy path, it's not a simple path. We don't have a route mapped out, but we shouldn't leave the trenches, we shouldn't leave the fight, we shouldn't leave the streets. From 2002, this has been happening, this is important. So we know that if we maintain our position, they will not pass. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Viviana. That was amazing. And I think you did a really fantastic job of squeezing 20 years of anti-mining resistance into a presentation of 20 minutes. I know that that can't have been easy. Okay, I've got some questions for you myself, but we'll have to come back to those later. And I think now we're going to dive straight into David's presentation. So David, the floor is yours.
Hola, buenas tardes desde Ecuador.
Hello, good afternoon from Ecuador, good evening. Hello everyone. Thank you so much, Tom, for inviting me to take part in this webinar. It is a great pleasure for me to be able to share this webinar with Viviana, with Bruno, and with all the attendees who are here to listen to us. I want to talk about the defense of our territories, of our nature, of life, against the advance of metal mining. You'll probably be able to see that there are some elements, recurrent elements, both in Viviana's presentation, but also in my presentation and in Bruno's presentation, probably, both in the progress of mining extractivism and in defense processes. Today, I'm going to be telling you and talking to you about the defense of water in Ecuador, because water is the main catalyzer of our resources against mining. And I would like to start by telling you about my country. Ecuador is a relatively small country with a size of 256,000 square meters. It's located in the Pacific coast of South America between Colombia and Peru. There are around 17 million inhabitants, so it's densely populated. What I can show you here, what I'm showing you right now, is a map of the different ecosystems that we have in Ecuador. Ecuador is one of the mega biodiverse countries in the world. In this small territory, we can find 3 out of the 10 biodiversity hotspots in the world. In terms of proportion, Ecuador is actually the most biodiverse country on the planet because of its small size, but the large amount of biodiversity that we can find there and the large amount of ecosystems and biomes that we find there. We have 21 different types of ecosystems distributed in the 4 different sections, in the Andean section, in the coastal section, and in the Amazon section, where we can find the lower Amazon and a different type of Amazon that is directly connected with the Andean mountain range. And we have the Galapagos region, finally, which is a very specific region, particularly because of its biodiversity. An interesting fact about the Ecuador, something that we share with other countries such as Brazil or Peru, is that we have a great presence of indigenous peoples. we have, there are peoples
nuestra
there
civilización
that have
moderna.
decided to
Los
stay
pueblos tagaeri
out of
y
touch
caminantes
from
habitan
the modern
principalmente en la región
civilizations.
amazónica baja, dentro
The
del
peoples who
Parque
live in the
Nacional
lower
Yasuní, y
Amazon
sobre esto
region, in the
estaré
Yasuni
comentando
National Park,
con más detalle
and I will
más adelante.
go into
Pero yo
detail
quería darles
later
esta,
on.
esta mirada del
But I
Ecuador
wanted
porque
to give you this
generalmente
oversight of
no hablamos
Ecuador,
de esto cuando hablamos del Ecuador.
because we don't
Hablamos
normally
de
talk
otras
about this. When we talk
cuestiones,
about Ecuador, we
pero
discuss
la
different
verdadera
things.
riqueza que tiene
But the
el
true
país, que tiene Ecuador
wealth
en este
of
momento y
our
siempre la ha
country
tenido y siempre la tendrá,
that
es
is
justamente su
always had and
biodiversidad,
will always have, it's
su
precisely its
riqueza natural. Y es
biodiversity, its
necesario mostrarla de
natural
esta manera
wealth.
porque
And it's
en los
important to
últimos
show
años
this because over the
el
last few
Ecuador,
years,
por parte de su gobierno, de sus gobiernos,
the
ha sido
government
exportado
of
hacia los
Ecuador
países del
has
mundo
been
como
exporting
una gran
or
oportunidad de
promoting
inversión,
the country
pero para el
to other
extractivismo minero
countries
y el
as an
extractivismo
opportunity for
petrolero.
investment
Y ha
for
habido esta necesidad
oil
por parte de nuestros gobiernos de
mining,
justamente
metal mining,
lograr que
and our governments have
empresas
managed
transnacionales
for
y
some
estados
multinational,
inviertan para la
transnational
explotación
companies
de la
and
minería.
countries
Pero para
to
hablar de la
invest
minería,
in
primero
mining
tenemos que
extraction.
hablar del petróleo.
But if we're going to talk about mining first, we
Este es
need to
un
talk about
mapa del
oil.
catastro petrolero
This is
en
a
el
map
Ecuador.
of the oil cadastre in Ecuador.
En el año 72 inicia la explotación
In
industrial del petróleo y
1972, the
particularmente en la
industrial oil
región
exploitation begins
amazónica, en
in
el norte de la
the
Amazonía ecuatoriana.
northern
Y
Amazonian
la
region.
verdad es que el crudo que tenemos en el Ecuador, el petróleo que
The
tenemos en el Ecuador no es de muy buena
Ecuador's
calidad.
crude oil
Es un
is
crudo
not a
pesado.
high quality oil, it's a
Sin
heavy
embargo,
crude.
la explotación petrolera en el Ecuador se
However,
convirtió en
oil
uno de los
exploitation in
principales
Ecuador
ingresos para el
became
Estado
one of the main
a
sources of
costa, por
income
supuesto, del
for the
sacrificio
state,
de
of course, at the
los
expense
territorios
of
de
the
los pueblos y
sacrifice
nacionalidades.
of the
En la
territories, the
parte
peoples, and nationalities.
norte de la Amazonía
The
encontrábamos a
northern
pueblos
part of the
originarios como
Amazon,
los
where
Tetes que fueron
indigenous
exterminados
people such as
completamente
the
por el
Tetes
avance
lived
de
were
la
totally
frontera petrolera.
exterminated by the
Los
advancement of the
bloques que vemos en la
oil
parte de abajo,
industry.
que están de color blanco,
Where
son
the
bloques que todavía
white
no han
squares that we
sido
see in the lower
concesionados,
part are
no han
areas
sido
that
licitados
haven't been
y se
concessioned
espera a
or
la
licensed yet.
segunda y tercera ronda petrolera para
And we're expecting
financiar con su
they're expecting
explotación.
the 12th or
Yo quiero
13th
que se queden con la
oil
imagen de este mapa
call
porque
to
más
start
adelante
the
les voy a
concessions.
mostrar el mapa
I
del
want you
catastro
to
minero en el
keep
Ecuador
this
para
image,
que
the image
vean
of this
cómo
map
existe
in your mind, because
en
later
el
on I'm
caso de
going
la
to show
Amazonía
you the map
particularmente
of
cómo
the
la
mining
explotación
cadastre
petrolera
in
se concentra
Ecuador.
en el norte y la
So you can
explotación
see
minera se
how the
concentra en
oil
el sur.
exploitation is concentrated in the
Actualmente
northern
la
part of the
explotación
country,
petrolera ha estado
and the
disminuyendo muchísimo
mining
sus
cadastre
ingresos. Esto
exploitation
para
has
el
been
año
concentrated in the
2023,
south.
para el 2024, se
The
prevé
incomes
que
of
la
the oil
explotación
industry have
alcance los
been lowering.
3.670 millones de dólares de ingresos,
It's
que es
expected to
mucho
reach
menos, por lo menos 15%
$3.6
menos
million
que el año
in income
2022,
in
y mucho menos
2023,
que hace una
far
década,
less
por
than
supuesto.
last year
Y
and
eso nos muestra que
way less than a
efectivamente
decade ago.
la extracción petrolera
This shows
en el
that
Ecuador está yendo
oil
hacia la baja.
extraction in Ecuador is on a downward trend.
Esto ha incitado a que el gobierno ecuatoriano y el Estado ecuatoriano
This
tomen
has
medidas
encouraged
preventivas. Una de esas es
the
justamente
government of
tratar de
Ecuador to
convertir a la
take
minería
some
en la actividad
preventive
que reemplace
measures.
al
What they
extractivismo
want to
petrolero.
do is to
Con este
replace
paso
the oil
adelante.
activity with mining
Lo que vemos
activity.
ahora es un mapa del
So what we can see
catastro
now
minero
is a
en el
map
Ecuador.
of the mining cadastre in Ecuador.
Hay momentos claves en cuanto a la minería
There are some key
en
moments
Ecuador, ¿no?
that tell
Y
the
es que
history of
en el año
mining in Ecuador.
2007
In
y 2008, mientras se
2007,
discutía la
between
nueva constitución del
2007 to
Ecuador, se emite
2008,
el mandato
while the
constituyente
new
minero por parte de la
constitution of
Asamblea
Ecuador was being
Constituyente del
discussed,
Ecuador, donde se
and mining
establecen
constituent
una serie
mandate
de
was issued
regulaciones y prohibiciones muy
that
estrictas
established
a
some
la
explicit
actividad minera. Por
prohibitions
ejemplo,
of the
se
mining
prohibía
activity.
tajantemente
For
la actividad
example,
minera en las
mining
zonas
activity
que constituyen fuentes hídricas para las
in
poblaciones del país,
in areas where there are
que
water sources
casualmente son
was banned.
justamente las zonas de las estribaciones
Those are
o las zonas
precisely
andinas, donde encontramos un
the
ecosistema bien
areas where we
particular, que
find
es el
a very
ecosistema
particular
páramo,
ecosystem,
que por sus
the
propias
Páramo
condiciones
ecosystem.
arquitectónicas
Thanks to its characteristics, it regulates the water cycles of the ecosystem, and it allows for the water sources to recharge in that area. That then goes to the Amazon or to the coast as well, in the Pacific. So mining concessions in that area had been banned. However, this never came into force. The government never finally approved this. In 2009, a new mining law was issued to regularize and strengthen the mining sector. This started to prepare Ecuador to embark on its industrial mining era. On the one hand, what it did was to put upside any other way of exploiting this area. We can see that in 2016 there was a reopening of the mining cadastre that allowed from 15 to 20% of the concession territory. The small squares that we can see in yellow are the existing concessions that had been already concessioned from 2009 till 2015. The squares that we see in red are the new concessions that started to be given from 2016 to 2018, when, thanks to the social pressure and the pressure of organizations, we managed to achieve the closure of the mining cadastre and finish the concessions. There were lots of concessions taking place that had to continue the procedure to become regularized and to continue with the exploration process and then move on to the phase of exploitation. And now let me go back to the previous map so that you can have a general idea of the oil cadastre in Ecuador and the mining cadastre. Nearly 40% of the Ecuadorian territory has been sacrificed for either oil activities or mining activities. And what they wanted to concession and to give out was an even larger part of the country. This map that we can see right now gives us a more local vision of the mining expansion in Ecuador. We see the three provinces, Morona, Santiago, Cañar, and Azuay. I live in the city of Cuenca, which belongs to the Azuay province. What we can see is the mining concessions expanded enormously throughout all these territories. Sorry, I'm not getting any sound. In the red circles, we can see the concessions of the main mining projects in the country that have been called strategic projects by our government. We have the Loma Larga project, the Guarinza project, that is invading indigenous territory of the Shuar people, a very antique nation that lives in the Amazon. And over there we find the Condor Mirador project, the largest mining project, metal mining, copper mining project in Ecuador. It's an open pit mining project, and I will give you more details about this project later on. I would like to focus on those two projects, Rio Blanco and Loma Larga. These two projects are located in an area of ecosystems where we have water resources. In Cuenca, there are 800,000 inhabitants that depend on these resources. The project is actually invading protected areas, national parks, which is the highest category of natural protection and conservation in Ecuador. This means that the mining conflict in Ecuador is not recent, it's long-standing. We see some emblematic examples, such as Intac versus Yurimagua in the north of Ecuador, Rio Blanco versus the Junefield Company, a Chinese company, which was the other project I was talking about, or the case of Victoria del Portete versus Loma Larga, project that belongs to a giant Canadian company that has projects in Africa and in other areas of the world. The new mining policy in Ecuador combines mining law, the mining cadastre, and the national mining plan, and it deepened greatly this conflict because what the Ecuadorian government wanted to achieve was for mining to replace oil and for mining extraction to offset the deficit that we see from the oil activity in Ecuador. That's why they seek to transform the south of Ecuador in a type of mining region, sort of mining region. And this obviously meant, has had terrible consequences. There's been a criminalization of the activities and the protests of people who want to reject the mining activities taking place there. This conflict escalates deeper when we talk about indigenous people in Ecuador. Indigenous peoples are the main ones affected by this mining expansion because they are dispossessed of their territories. The ecosystems upon which they depend become destroyed, especially the paramos and the Amazon rainforest. It is also worth mentioning that indigenous peoples are ecosystemic peoples. They rely on the ecosystems in which they live. And the advancement of mining transforms their dynamics, their life projects, and they transform their vision from a collective vision to an individual vision. We can identify this because we see that the presence of mining projects in these indigenous territories completely transform their dynamics. They stop being hunters, they stop relying on farming or hunting activities, and they become employees, workers for these mining companies. That means they enter this capital accumulation dynamics, which is the outcome of the wages they are paid from these mining companies and from the incentives that they get so that they invest their salaries, their wages in entrepreneurial projects, as they call them. But there are some indigenous peoples who are rejecting the advancement of mining. But of course, the consequence is the repression and the assassination of their leaders, like José Tendetza, José Durazno, some indigenous leaders who resisted facing the advancement of mining. We have some even worse examples, such as the one of the Cascomi community. The main community hub, San Marcos, was completely destroyed in Cascomi to give access to a mining project. We cannot see the image very well here, sadly, but we can see that from 2005 to 2014 and then 2019, the indigenous territory of the Shuar Aruntan peoples was dispossessed up to 56% due to the mining concessions. The Guarinza project has been developed there, driven by the Canadian company Solaris Resources, that has been pushing this project, saying that it's a social and responsible project which is
también
obviously
parte del equipo
false.
jurídico
I'm
del
part of the
pueblo
legal
Shuar
team
Arutam
of
y
the
estamos
Shuar
peleando
Arutam
justamente
peoples,
por
and we
defender
are
sus territorios
precisely
en
fighting in
conjunto con
defense of the territories
el Consejo de Gobierno
together with the
de
government
este
council
gran pueblo originario.
of this great
Ahora quiero hablarles
indigenous
sobre las resistencias que tenemos
town.
en
Now I want to
Ecuador.
talk about the different
Y es que a
resistance
pesar del
movements that we
avance
have in
de la minería
Ecuador,
metálica,
because despite the
las
advance of
respuestas
metal
de
mining,
resistencia ha sido también una respuesta muy fuerte,
resistance has
una respuesta
emerged,
que ha
and this
logrado grandes
response
victorias.
has
Y
been
quiero
quite strong,
comentarles
and it
sobre los
has
principales
achieved
medios
great
que hemos tenido
victories.
para la
And I want to
resistencia.
tell you
Hemos
about the
puesto
different
tres grandes
means
grupos.
that we've used
El
for
primero, que es
resistance.
la
I
lucha
classify
social,
them
segundo, las
around three
estrategias
different
jurídicas y
topics.
por
The
último,
first
los
one is social
mecanismos políticos.
struggles, social fight. The
En cuanto a
second
la
one is
lucha
legal
social, lo
strategies,
que ha
and the third one is
sucedido es
political
que las
mechanisms.
organizaciones frente al
With
avance
regards
de
to
la
social
minería
fight,
metálica han visto la
facing the
necesidad
advance of
de
metal mining,
fortalecimiento organizacional,
organizations
no
have seen the
solamente
need
a lo
to
interno
organize
y a lo externo.
themselves internally and
También
externally.
se ha visto la necesidad de fortalecer la
They've also seen
identidad
the
como una
need
estrategia de
to
defensa. Y en el
strengthen
Ecuador hablamos de
identity
procesos
as
de
a defense strategy.
reindigenización.
We talked
Eso
about
significa que
re-indigenization
pueblos que
processes in Ecuador.
anteriormente
This
habían
means
negado su
different
identidad
peoples
como
that
pueblos
had
indígenas debido
previously
principalmente
denied or
a
rejected their
la
indigenous
discriminación,
identity
al racismo que
due
sufrían.
to
Ahora
discrimination and racism
identifican
that they were
a
exposed to,
reidentificarse
they
como pueblos
now
indígenas
are
una
identifying
manera
themselves
adecuada y
again as
efectiva de poder defender
indigenous,
sus territorios.
because this is a way,
Sobre
a
todo
means
en
to
el sentido de
defend the
poder
rights and
hacer
the
valer los
territory
títulos colectivos que tienen
and
sobre
to
sus territorios.
value the rights on these
También ha
lands.
existido un fortalecimiento de la autoridad
There's
y
also
el
been a
control territorial,
strengthening
es
of
decir, cada vez
authority
son
and
más los
territorial
mecanismos
control. There are
que utilizan los
an increasing
pueblos
number
para
of
poder defender sus
mechanisms
territorios,
that
haciéndose valer
the
como
different peoples
autoridades
use to defend their
absolutas de sus territorios,
territories,
¿no? Incluso llegando a rechazar la
using that
presencia del Estado
authoritative
ecuatoriano
power
en estos territorios para poder impedir
and
el avance
using
de las
the
empresas
authority of
mineras.
at the national level
Luego
to
está la articulación
block
a
the
nivel
access
local,
of
a nivel
mining
regional y
companies.
a
Then we
nivel
have an
nacional.
articulation at
Por
the local,
ejemplo, yo
regional,
soy
national
parte del
levels.
Cabildo por el
For
Agua
example,
de Cuenca,
I
Cabildo
am
Nacional,
part of the People's
y el
Councils
Cabildo por
for
el
the Water
Agua
of
es
Cuenca,
un esfuerzo de
the
articular a
Cabildo
las
para el Agua de
comunidades, a
Cuenca.
las
This is an
organizaciones
effort
y
to
a las personas
articulate
de
people, individuals,
que
organizations, and
justamente
communities
defendemos el agua en Cuenca
of
y el
people
Azuay.
who
Es decir,
defend
es una
water
articulación a
in
nivel
Cuenca and in the
local,
Azuay
regional,
province.
para poder defender el agua
This is a
frente al
local,
avance
regional,
de la
national
minería.
structure to
Y por último
defend
están las estrategias
the use
de
of water in the
movilización
face of
nacional,
mining. And
estrategias
finally,
que
we
pues
have
efectivamente
national mobilization
convocan a que nos
strategies,
articulemos en
strategies that
grandes
call
espacios, como por
out,
ejemplo el
call
Frente Nacional
people
Antiminero
to
del Ecuador,
mobilize,
que
such as the
articula a
anti-mining
las organizaciones de todo
Equatorian
el país
Front.
para defender a los
These are
territorios y a la
movements
naturaleza
that
de la
coordinate and
nación.
organize
Luego
different
están las estrategias
communities to
jurídicas que
stand
se basan principalmente en la
to
Constitución del
mining.
Ecuador del
Then there are
2008.
legal strategies
Estas
based on the
demandas
Constitution of
permanentes
2008.
la Constitución nos permite presentar demandas
The Constitution
constitucionales
allows us
con
to
base en
file
derechos
constitutional
constitucionales para
lawsuits
frenar el avance de
based
las
on the
actividades
Constitution to
mineras.
stop
Y así
mining
encontramos tres
projects.
grandes grupos de
And we
derechos. Primero son
find
los derechos
three
colectivos
groups
de
of
los pueblos
rights:
indígenas,
indigenous
como por ejemplo
collective
el
rights,
derecho a la
such
consulta
as the
previa
right
o el
to
derecho al
prior
territorio.
consultation or the right
Luego
to the
tenemos
land.
los derechos
Then we
humanos
have
ambientales, como el derecho
environmental
al medio
human
ambiente
rights, such as
sano,
the
el
right to
derecho
a
al
healthy
agua o el
environment, the
derecho
right
a
to
la
water,
consulta ambiental.
or the
Y por
rights to
último, los
environmental
famosos derechos
consultation.
de la naturaleza,
And
que
finally, we
reconocen
have
a la misma
the
naturaleza
rights of
como un sujeto de
nature
derechos
that
y por
recognize
lo
nature
tanto
as a subject of
se
right,
reconocen derechos
and
para los sujetos
its rights
que
are
son
recognized,
parte de la
or the
naturaleza.
rights
Y
of
ahí
the people
encontramos
who are
derechos
subject to
como por
nature are
ejemplo el derecho a la
recognized. And we have
reproducción de sus
rights such
ciclos
as the right
vitales
to
o el
reproduction of its
derecho
vital
a su
cycles, the
dinámica
right to its
evolutiva.
evolutionary dynamics.
Por último están los mecanismos
Finally,
políticos.
we have
Ahí
political
tenemos el
mechanisms.
posicionamiento de la
There we
lucha
see the
dentro
positioning of
de
the
la
struggle, of the
política
fight within
pública,
the public
¿sí?
political agenda.
Y hoy por hoy no hay nadie en el Ecuador que no
Nowadays,
entienda que hablar de minería en el
everyone in
contexto
Ecuador
político
understands
es
that when we talk about
absolutamente
mining at the
necesario.
political context,
Asimismo, la
it's
presión a las autoridades locales y
necessary.
nacionales
There's
y la
also
más
the pressure on
importante de
local and
todos
national
son los
authorities,
mecanismos de
and the
democracia
most
directa,
important
las
one, which is
consultas populares por
which
el
are
agua
mechanisms of
contra la
direct
minería. En el caso
democracy.
de Viviana, ustedes
So
les
the popular
decían las
consultations for
consultas
water and
públicas.
against mining, I
En el
think
caso del
Viviana
Ecuador,
said they
pues,
call them
son
public
las consultas
consultations.
populares.
We call them popular
En temas
consultations
mineros
in
hemos
Ecuador.
tenido tres grandes consultas populares, la
In
consulta
terms
de
of
Limón, la
mining
consulta
projects,
de
we've
Cuenca
held
y
3 local popular consultations, the Girón consultation, the Cuenca, and the Choco Andino. the three of them had a positive outcome, which was the banning of mining. And I'm going to tell you now about the major victories that we've had against mining in Ecuador in 2018. The Molleturo community achieved the definitive suspension of the Rio Blanco project. This was one of the 3 strategic projects in the country, in the hands of a Chinese company, and this was achieved through a legal strategy to demand the right to prior consultation. The judges then decided to suspend this project indefinitely.
In 2009, we have the case of Sinango. The indigenous communities ICOFAN managed to eradicate more than 40 mining concessions in the territory, also through this legal strategy of previous consultation, and they managed to get rid of this mineral mining in the territory. In 2019, we also have the case of Bosque Protector Los Cedros, which eliminated mining in the whole territory, more than 200,000 hectares that were protected by precisely a claim, a constitutional claim, based on environmental consultation and the own rights of nature. Through these strategies, they managed to ban mining in the whole territory. Then we also have different popular consultations, one in Girón in 2019 that managed to ban mining in the Páramos of Quim-Sacocha, with 80%, 86% of the population voting for this ban. In 2021, we have the case of the popular consultation in Cuenca. 80% of the population in Cuenca voted for banning mining in the region in order to protect water in Ecuador. There is 800,000 people living in Cuenca, and through these popular consultation managed to ban mining in the region. In 2022, there was a national movement led by indigenous communities that managed, through Decree 151, to ban the movement of this project, or this decree that was trying to impose a new mining national plan. What they were trying to do is trying to reduce all the administrative procedure in order to make for the mining the process much quicker and easier. And then finally, we have the popular consultation in Toco Andino in Quito in 2023, when they managed to ban metal mining in the most biodiverse territory in the Toco Andino, also through a popular consultation. And finally, before finishing, I would like to talk about the popular consultation for the Yasuni. It's a national consultation, and I think it's very important because it shows what is happening politically in Ecuador, which is that in the country, we don't have a more important national consensus than protecting our biodiversity and our environment. This consultation, the Yasuni consultation, is different to the others because it happens at a national level. All the citizens of Ecuador are consulted, and what it manages is to ban oil drilling in the National Park of Yasuni. 60% of the population decided that, yes, this oil drilling couldn't keep going in this region. And what we can see through this result is that in Ecuador, we are progressing. We are protecting our nature, we're protecting our indigenous territories, we're protecting our communities, and we are protecting life in general. I am going to end my presentation here with this message that in Ecuador, we have this big purpose of stopping extractivism, and we have the need of building post-extractivism societies that that help us to live in nature, in our harmony with nature. Thank you very much for your attention, and that's all for me.
Great, thank you, David. That was fantastic. Again, so much information in such a short space of time. And nice to finish on a positive note as well. It's great to hear about some of the latest developments. Bruno, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
So-
perfect. Okay, so when you're ready, we can begin.
Okay, so thank you very much, Tom, for the invitation. Muito obrigado pela oportunidade de estar aqui conversando com vocês.
Thank you for the opportunity for
Boa
being
tarde,
here with
boa
you.
noite
Good afternoon and good
para quem está
evening
acompanhando a gente.
for those who are
Bom,
here with
vou
us
usar
today
minha
in this
apresentação.
webinar.
Eu sou Bruno Milanês, eu sou
I'm
professor
Bruno
aqui na Universidade
Milanese.
Federal de Juiz de Fora.
I work in the Federal University of Juiz de
Coordeno
Fora in
estudos sobre
Brazil,
mineração.
and I coordinate a
Quando o
group
Tom me convidou
about
para essa
mining.
para esse webinar, tive uma grande,
When Tom
grande
invited me
desafio
for this
que foi
webinar, I had a big
pensar
challenge
que história contar.
when I started to
Existem
think
várias
which story
situações
should I
diferentes
tell, because there are
da
different
mineração no Brasil.
situations
Alguns
regarding
fatos,
mining,
do
some
orgulho
success
que
stories
inspiram muito as experiências da Argentina e também
that,
do
well,
Equador.
as the experience in
Mas
Argentina
num
and Ecuador
contexto pouco
inspire
mais
us a lot.
geral,
But
eu
in a
pensei
general
talvez
context, I thought I'd
fosse trazer pouco do contexto da situação mais recente do Brasil.
might
E
talk
fazer uma
about
breve
the most
avaliação de
recent
como aconteceu ao
situation
longo
in
desse
Brazil,
ano
to
e
do
como
an
o Brasil
assessment of what
evolui do
happened
ponto de vista
along this year,
política mineral e do que pode vir a acontecer
what's
ao longo
going
do governo
on
Lula, né? Então,
also
um pouco
in the
de
government
análise
of
de
Lula.
conjuntura, talvez, e compartilhar as minhas impressões e
So I would like to
inquietações
share
com vocês,
my
né?
ideas and
Então,
impressions with you,
rapidamente
and also my
contextualizar um
worries.
pouco da mineração no
So
Brasil,
this is the
tratar
context. I'm going to talk
particularmente
about the context
a
of mining
questão
in
do garimpo,
Brazil, talk
né?
about
Só
garimpos.
para localizar, no Brasil a gente usa a palavra garimpo para
We
se
use this
referir
word in
ao que
Brazil to
em termos de
refer
inglês se fala de pequena mineração ou mineração artesanal.
to maybe small
Embora
mining.
originalmente a palavra vem muito associada ao que a gente vai
This
chamar de garimpeiro
word
também, que
originally
é
comes from
o trabalhador
garimpeiro
individual
in Brazil, that it's
fazendo
an
a
individual
mineração
worker
manual.
doing
Mas hoje em
mining,
dia
manual
essa atividade está
mining, but
muito mais ampla
nowadays
e
this
ainda é
activity is
chamado garimpo.
broader and it's
São
still called garimpo in
minerações de
Portuguese.
pequeno a médio porte,
Let's
já
say in
totalmente
small
mecanizadas,
size that it's now
envolvendo
already
escavadeiras
mechanical.
e
So we
barcaças
have
e uma série de equipamentos que podem chegar a
different
2 milhões de
equipments
reais cada
that
equipamento.
can
Então, deixou de ser
have a value of
uma
1 or
atuação
2
individual e
million
é uma atuação
euros
empresarial,
each
porém, na maior
equipment.
parte das vezes ilegal. Então, o termo garimpo vai pouco além da
So
mineração artesanal aqui.
garimpos goes a
Então,
little
vou
bit
me
beyond this
deter pouco na discussão sobre a
manual
crise
or
Yanomami.
so-called
Acho que muitas
small
pessoas
mining.
ouviram falar
Also, the
nisso em
Yanomami
janeiro e depois
crisis,
sumiu
probably you've heard
das
about
notícias, pelo
this.
menos no Brasil. Então, acho que é
We've
importante
heard
a gente
about
discutir esse contexto,
this in the news, but
né?
then
E como isso
suddenly
impactou
disappeared from the
diretamente
news,
no
and how this
posicionamento
had
do
an
governo
impact
federal.
in the positioning of the federal government
Atualmente, né, de decidir
nowadays,
como o problema
and
mineral ser apenas o garimpo
to
e fechando os olhos para todo o resto dos
and how they
impactos das
close their eyes, let's say,
minerais que
to
depois algumas
all the rest of the
consequências,
impacts of this
né?
activity.
Então, os argumentos que eu vou tentar trazer para
So
vocês, né, dentro dessa estrutura,
I'm going to talk about
começando
different arguments.
a mostrar
First,
que durante
I'm going
o
to start
governo
showing that
Bolsonaro, antigo
during
presidente,
Bolsonaro's
né, houve
regime, our former
crescimento
president, there was
muito
an
considerável
increase, a
da mineração ilegal no
considerable
país.
increase of illegal mining in the country.
Felizmente, quando houve a mudança e o presidente Lula foi
Fortunately,
eleito,
when Lula was
existiu uma crise
elected,
humanitária envolvendo os índios Yanomami no
there
norte
was
do
an
país
improvement.
e as medidas
There
foram
was a
muito assertivas,
humanitarian
embora não
crisis.
suficientes, né? Também acho que é importante levar isso em consideração. A forma como a política está sendo levada não
The
parece
way
ser
the
suficiente e eficaz para resolver o
politics is
problema.
being led, it seems that
Mas apesar
it's
desses
not
avanços
enough.
pontuais
But
na questão Yanomami, né, a gente vê que
apart from
algumas
this
políticas
Yanomami specific
emblemáticas do
case,
período
we
Bolsonaro
see
continuam
that
em
there are
vigor
still
e que
some
muitos
problems from
conflitos,
Bolsonaro that
conflitos
still
dentro da
go
mineração estão
on,
sendo ignorados,
and
infelizmente.
many
E
conflicts
diante disso
in
tudo, esse é um novo
mining are
desafio, essa é
being
uma coisa que
ignored.
o Tom
And
podia mencionar
also,
rapidamente. Eu vou aqui somente falar bem brevemente, mas pode trabalhar pouco
just to
mais
briefly
na parte dos nossos
talk about other
debates, que é o
conflicts,
papel dos
that
minerais
it's the
críticos da
role
transição energética
of
na legislação da
critical
mineração no Brasil.
minerals in energy transition
Então, só para contextualizar
in
pouco,
Brazil.
né, a gente quando pensa
We have mining in Latin America, in Peru, Ecuador, Argentina, but Brazil is the biggest mining export country in the world. It has a large industry, and over the past 20 years, they have been located as an extractivist, not only in mining, but oil and meat. So second in iron, third in niobium, tantalum, vanadium, fourth bauxite, fourth magnesium, and seventh copper. And gold is the second mining more exported in the country, but not relevant in the list. What is the expansion that we had? Well, we had more conflicts about mining in Brazil. So we have the CPT and we can observe not only an increase of the conflicts in general as from 2010, but there's a significant increase of the participation of the so-called garimpos as from 2019 when Bolsonaro's regime started. So here the increase of the garimpos, but let's not forget that 60% of the conflicts are caused by big mining companies, the big scale mining. So we cannot underestimate that 60%. So it's also important to talk about gold. In spite of the capacity of Brazil, there is a lack of control of gold in Brazil. So in 2019, 2020, there was an increase of almost 10% of extracted gold from 80 tons to 89 tons. And this increase is due to the garimpo. And some studies were done to try to identify the origin of that gold, and 30% of the gold was not possible to classify its origin, and 62% was possible to identify its origin, and only 55% had a legal origin. So only 34% of gold extracted in Brazil, it comes from legal sources. The rest, we don't know where it comes from, or it's clearly illegal gold or potentially illegal. So it shows the fragility of the situation of gold in Brazil. And it has increased a lot during the mandate of Bolsonaro in Brazil. What's the consequence of this change in the government? So there's an attempt to try to change this illegal extraction of gold. So there was a first attempt by the court, and this say the presumed good faith. When they say it's legal, they believe it's legal, and the control was manual and so on. But at the same time, there was another one with the federal chamber. There was a law to regulate the extraction of gold, but it's going very slowly. But at the same time, the IPRAM, that is the Association of Big Mining Companies in Brazil, what are they doing? They are defending the system of tracking of gold, participating in different workshops, but it's probably a private system. So what they're suggesting is a private certification to guarantee the origin of gold. What are the challenges of garimpos in Brazil? We have a growth of the area of garimpos in Brazil, and here we can think that the participation in the indigenous lands reaches until 40,000 hectares. So we have also activities in areas of preservation of restricted use, and this light pink is garimpos that is neither in indigenous areas nor in protected lands. It could be happening, for example, in areas of protected areas, but it doesn't have restricted use. So here we see the participation of garimpos in the restricted areas and showing the importance of the occupation of indigenous lands. So here we see the different figures for Kayapo, Mundukuru, Yanomami. And apart from that, there's something else that is this fusion, let's say, between trafficking of cocaine and illegal traffic of gold. So the drug dealers and the garimperos share infrastructures, for example, routes, planes, and so on. So gold is used for money laundering of drugs, and garimperos have access to bigger arms, and this increases also violence in the region. It's something very complex. Here we have the mapping, and here we have different areas of landing in the Amazon region. So there is a completely lack of control in the Amazonia. So it's something that was well known at the end of 2022, but it exploded in the media in 2023. That was a humanitarian crisis of the Yanomami people that comes in the north of Brazil, with the border of Venezuela, where there was an advancement of garimpos in the region and an increase of violence, an increase of cases of malaria due to the amount of pits that they had of the water that was in the pits, and it attracted mosquitoes and it increased the cases of malaria. And it also made the circulation of indigenous people very difficult. So there was a big action at the beginning of 2023. So this is for you to have an idea how big this problem was. So there was an increase of 300% of the devastated area of the Yanomami impacted area. And here, just for you to see different areas of illegal landing within the Yanomami territory. And to try to deal with this, the government of Lula created a decree 2023 to approach two parts. One for public health. They declared an emergency of national relevance, especially to help with food aid, medicine supply, and to reopen health centers and FUNAI bases that they are responsible for protecting indigenous people, and also an area of identification of aerial evacuation to fight against this illegal plane traffic. So this created because it created a bigger isolation in the north of the country. And apart from that, they needed also logistic support to different bodies. So along these 6 months, there were aerial evacuations for health with severe malaria, 24.6 tons of food aids, and over 573 units of medicine for malaria. So they already destroyed 41 planes, less than what had been destroyed and seized in 2022. And talking about dredges, 112 destroyed in 2023, 415 engines were destroyed, 90 electric generators, and 327 camping sites. So there was a big oppression in the territory for those illegal garimpos. Some regions within the territory present different problems. Here we see that the garimpeiros were not out of all the areas. Many of the health centers are not working properly. The visits of healthcare workers to the indigenous houses is not happening properly. There are still many cases of malaria, and food has arrived to many places, but not everywhere. So in 2022, there were around 15,000 cases, and in the first part of 2023, over 13,000. So we have a quite severe situation. When they created this exclusion area, so they asked a volunteer evacuation. So they sent part of the equipment to Guyana. Many of their imperials moved within the territory, but they didn't leave. And in spite of all these efforts, there was a significant reduction of the activity, but there was a degradation also in the area. And regarding humanitarian aid, well, so the food distribution is based on how easy it is to access and not of the specific demand of the people, and low efficiency of the army creates a food that has to be thrown away because it's rotten or expires. So what we observe, it's a whole debate that this illegal matter is being ignored in Brazil. So it comes from the Bolsonaro mandate with this decree, with different relevant vital economic sectors. There were also minerals used in critical sectors in United States, for example, in the global north, that it's used for technology, for example, but in Brazil, they included these minerals that guarantee this trade surplus, and Brazil was included. And we have, for example, 19 projects that were classified as strategic in Brazil, 4 from gold, 3 from iron ore, without counting of manganese that doesn't have a connection with this debate. It wouldn't be classified as critical minerals, but it's just a way of facilitating this. So just trying to debate with the bodies, how can they make these projects viable?
Contradictions and mapping. 31% of the projects are in conflict with indigenous peoples, with Quilombola communities. Quilombola communities are Afro-descendants, slave Africans that had to flee from slavery, and they created communities. In Brazil, 75% have conflict with the national heritage, and the federal government is still incentivizing that, and they try to make it feasible. And one of the main concerns is Ponta Grande at the river, Sigu. This led to some impacts and human violations. Another case, it's a campaign of the state-related government in Minas Gerais, in the north of Minas. It's the so-called Lithium Valley. The Lithium Valley the request for research for the extraction of lithium in that region in Brazil. And clearly, you can see that it's close to some areas. It wouldn't be allowed if we don't research. It cannot happen in indigenous lands. In blue, you can appreciate it. There are also quilombola territories next to that area. This is the idea that this can have an impact on indigenous peoples, and the impact may be relevant. Special case of the Sigma Lithium has been developments. There have been meetings with the Ministry of the Social Development, the Ministry of the Women, the Ministry of Energy and Mining, and this is having an impact on the Sinta Vermelha indigenous people. It is leading to water scarcity, possible destruction of sacred places, and also conflict with quilombola communities because there is a lack of consultation. There is no consultation, prior consultation. In the discussion of the Yanomami crisis, there was a war on garimpo. There's some actions, but it's like the war on drugs. The same mistakes. They are in the territory, but they are not disassembling the funding network. Confiscated aircrafts are small because they pertain to large companies. They are only having a grassroots action, not along the chain. And also the frontier effect with Guyana and Venezuela. There is a garimpo movement in territories, and we need international coordination of the countries to act on that. We need a discussion to make this happen. We have forgotten about garimpos in some political agendas, and there is the redemption of large-scale mining, garimpos, insufficient initiatives against illegal mining in other indigenous lands. It's no longer considered in Brazil. And now, today, they have created a positive agenda. They are leading the discussion against illegal mining. They are opposing illegal mining. And they are also considering the salvation because of the minerals of energy transition. And they say that they are saving the world. Allegedly, there is a change in the position in the discourse. And some government sectors show this position in terms of mining, which is still having a very severe impact on lands in the country. That's all on my part, and I hope I gave you a good overview of the situation in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Bruno. Another fantastic presentation, and again, there's so much information, so much to absorb. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. So I can see that there are already some questions in the chat. So I think we'll start with one for you, Bruno, and it's from Daniel Suarez, and he asks, who are the garimperos? Are they indigenous people? Are they Brazilian citizens? And who finances them?
They are not usually indigenous peoples. There are just a few indigenous peoples in some lands who are garimpos. They are foreigners, many migrants from the northeastern region of the country, many migrants from the central eastern part of the country and from the north, from some northern cities. There is this population movement, as I mentioned earlier. When a new garimpo is found, a group of people migrate from a region to another, but they are not indigenous peoples. When those people access lands, they have conflicts with indigenous peoples, not only because of their diseases, but because also they facilitate the access to drugs and to illegal drinks. So this has an impact on the fabric of indigenous peoples. Some indigenous people get involved, but most of them reject it, and they're against the mine extraction or mining in terms of garimpos or large-scale mining. Funding organizations are diverse. some money come from agribusiness in Brazil. Many agribusiness people who live in the north in Mato Grosso or even in Pará, they want to diversify their investment activities. So small and medium scale companies may fund those activities. And this is how the mapping works.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, there's some more questions in the chat here. So one for Viviana, which I will read in Spanish. So again, the question is from Daniel Suarez, and he asks, ¿Existe algún caso en Argentina?
Is there any example in Argentina where a mining project has contaminated a water tributary and that has directly affected the community? For example, mass disease, intoxications, etc. Well, large-scale mining first emerged in Argentina after the 90s. The first mining project took place in Catamarca, the Bajo Lumbrera project. There were toxic spills that affected the local population and it affected their daily lives. The biggest spillages took place in the San Juan province in the Veladero mine. It's a gold mine, 4,000 meters in altitude. And this affected and impacted the Hacha River. The levels of heavy metals existent in these rivers are extremely high. Mega mining, especially in those circumstances, not like in Esquel, where the project is 6 kilometers away, but in these cases where it's even further away, intoxications are chronic. And those very serious diseases, such as cancer, start emerging many years later. In Hacha, the first sign, the first symptom that was spotted after the analysis done by the neighbors in the Hacha community, showed huge concentrations of aluminum. This area was a non-onion farming area and an onion exporting area. So mining does not only compete in water resources, but also leaves aside all the other productions, all the other activities. The people working in the other activities were left without a job, basically. The law states that after 3 spillages, the mining project needs to be closed. But Veladero has had 3 spillages already. Those responsibles had been denounced, have been reported. We are still waiting for justice. It's been a while. The spill happened in 2015. And on the other hand, laws in Argentina are not enforced or not complied with, because obviously mining, there's certain control envisaged in the laws, such as this legislation that said that after 3 spillages the project has to be closed. This is not complied with. It's not happening even after gathering scientific data from universities about the impacts of the spillages that took place in Veladero. Something else that we should clarify is that the Veladero spillage was made public through WhatsApp message from one of the employees. He sent a message to his family warning them about the spillage on the river, because the company just didn't want to inform and to report this. They're trying to protect, so the neighbor was trying to protect the other neighbors. So the environmental damages tend to be hidden. In Argentina, we also have a glaciers law, law for glaciers, in which in order to conserve and preserve water, mega mining shouldn't be allowed in areas where there are glaciers. But Veladero has destroyed several glaciers and it's still operating. So this institutional pollution makes the very institutions, makes them to stop fulfilling the protective role that they have with the communities.
Great, thank you, Viviana. And I also have a question of my own for David, which I will ask in Spanish. Entonces, David,
David, I wanted to know a bit more about the situation and the political landscape in Ecuador. In your presentation, you've mentioned that there is a strong wish on the part of the population against further extractivism and against further mining. And this has been expressed in different ways, with the popular consultations, with the different demonstrations, etc.
Entonces quería saber si existe un reconocimiento de eso por parte de
So I wanted to know, are the authorities recognizing this? And is there someone in a position of power in Ecuador who may be already considering taking alternatives? Thank you, Tom, for your question. At the authorities level, I wanted to tell you that right now in Ecuador, we're going through an electoral process, which is quite particular. The current president will finish his term before the legal period, because a mechanism in the constitution was activated. It's called crossed death, muerte cruzada. It allows the president to dissolve the Congress with the condition that he will also step down in a maximum period of 6 months. So that's the situation we are seeing right now. Both candidates to the presidency of Ecuador have extractivist profiles. Both the Correísta candidate, Correísmo was a government that ruled the country for over 10 years, and she has an extractivist profile, even though her government plan and her work plan speak of the defense of nature, but the truth is that they have strong links with the extractivist movements, because Latin American progressist movements are closely linked with the nationalization of extractivism. They try to get the highest economic return by allowing extractivism. That's why they don't strictly oppose the advancement of mining, of oil extraction, or agroindustry. They see an opportunity to satisfy the financial needs of the country. On the other side, there's Daniel Noboa, another candidate who comes from has a business background. He's got strong links with mining companies. His family has invested in mining companies in Ecuador, and despite he opposed and he demonstrated against Yasuni, his proposal to replace the resources from the oil extraction activities in Yasuni is to go into mining and to allow mining all across the country. So both candidates, both the Correísta candidate and the business candidate, are seeking to promote extractivism in the country. But then society and communities as a whole opposed this view. They want to oppose extractivism, they want to fight this model, they want to attain a different financial model that does not rely on the profits that come through extractivism. And this is the big dilemma situation that we are going through in this country.
Gracias, David. Okay, I think we have time for about one more question, and I can't see anything in the Q&A, so I'm going to ask it. And this one is for Bruno. I'm going to ask it in Portuguese. So, Bruno, eu queria saber como foi
I'd like to know
a ofensiva
how
no
in the indigenous
no Brasil.
Yanomami territory, well, there was this global news. What was the perception there? And part of the reason why the Bolsonaro government was able to destroy the Amazon, part of the reason is that for most of the Brazilian population, the Amazon is far away. It's not necessarily something that is related to their daily lives. And this year, we have had a military offensive with the Brazilian army involved inside the country. So I'd like to know about your perception. So I'd like to know about the media coverage and how the society took that. Thank you. It was interesting to see that shift in, well, there's a change in the societal position and even in the media position. There was a shift. People were shocked. People thought of a humanitarian crisis. We need money. We need food aid. There was a social mobilization when the government said that that was an issue. We had been dragging that crisis, and availability, and the media was willing to denounce that. Although it was tricky to denounce it in some groups related to health, when journalists wanted to enter the Yanomami territory, but they weren't allowed to. That was controlled by many soldiers, and there were also logistics issues involved. But people thought that it was far away, and when the government made a call to reverse the media position, and we started to have a good coverage, and there was a social discussion, there was a change, there was a shift. But we had been dragging that process for a long time, and from one day to another, they eventually defined it as a crisis. But 2 months earlier, it was considered just something normal, something that was happening in the Amazon. So there was a coverage, but mainly focusing on the humanitarian crisis. We need to save indigenous peoples, the Yanomami peoples. We have to remove the garimpeiros and large-scale mining. But we didn't discuss the structures, the chain, the coal consumption, the coal exports. We rather focus on other things. Well, in some small TV channels and media, they discuss those issues. The Agência Pública Intercept, those TV channels, they have a different structure. But the large media, they only talk about criminalization of garimpeiros, and they talk about wildfires. You know, they want to discuss only the many issues, and the suffering of Yanomami people on the other hand. There were two stereotypes, but they didn't dig into the actual discussion, because there is an issue with the cold chain in Brazil, as you know.
Obrigado, Bruno. Okay, so yeah, we're 2 minutes to wait, so unfortunately we're out of time. I'd just like, before we go, to say a big thank you to the panelists. Those were 3 incredible presentations. I certainly have learned a lot this evening. Really interesting stuff. I'd also like very much to thank the interpreters, who have done an amazing job. It's really difficult what they do, so to have everything flow so smoothly is really incredible. So thank you very much to them. And yeah, and last but not least, thank you to all of the guests who came this evening. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.